The first thing Marcus Bennett noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind, the heavy kind that settles over a courtroom when people know something terrible is about to happen. Rain tapped against the tall courthouse windows in downtown Atlanta. Gray clouds hung low above the city skyline. The air felt cold despite the season. Marcus sat at the defense table wearing a wrinkled detention uniform. He was 17 years old, a high school senior, honor student, debate captain, the kind of young man teachers trusted and neighbors admired. His wrists rested on the table. The metal cuffs felt heavier than they should have. Across the room, his mother, Angela Bennett, gripped the edge of a wooden bench. She worked as a pediatric surgeon at one of Atlanta's busiest hospitals. For weeks, she had barely slept. Every night ended with legal documents. Every morning began with hope that somehow this nightmare would finally end. 3 weeks earlier, life had been ordinary. Marcus lived in a modest neighborhood outside Atlanta. The streets were lined with oak trees. Children rode bicycles until sunset. Neighbors still waved from their porches. His family home was warm and welcoming. Family photographs covered the hallway walls. One showed Marcus holding a state academic trophy. Another captured a family trip to the Grand Canyon during summer vacation. On a warm Friday evening, Marcus sat at the kitchen table preparing for a statewide debate competition. His topic centered on criminal justice reform. The irony would haunt him later. He highlighted passages and practiced arguments while eating cereal from a large blue bowl. His mother packed dinner for her overnight hospital shift. Before leaving, she kissed his forehead and reminded him to finish his homework. His father was away in Austin, Texas. That happened often. Business meetings, conferences, government committees. Marcus never paid much attention to the details. His father simply worked in public service and traveled frequently. That was enough explanation for him. Later that evening, Marcus texted his best friend, Jordan Reed. They planned to meet at a convenience store nearby before watching movies at Jordan's house. It felt like any other Friday. The weather was pleasant. The sidewalks were busy. Families enjoyed the final warm weeks before winter arrived. As Marcus walked toward the store, he thought about college applications. He dreamed of studying law in Chicago or New York. He wanted to help people someday. His teachers believed he could accomplish anything. His future seemed wide open. Then a police cruiser appeared behind him. The vehicle slowed. Its headlights illuminated the sidewalk. Marcus glanced over his shoulder but kept walking. A few seconds later, flashing red and blue lights exploded across the street. The cruiser stopped beside him. Officer Richard Keller stepped out. Mid-40s, broad shoulders, stern expression. One hand rested near his holstered weapon. He studied Marcus for several seconds before speaking. "Where are you headed tonight?" Marcus answered politely. He explained he was meeting a friend. He even showed his school identification, but something in Keller's eyes suggested the conversation had already been decided before it began. The officer ordered Marcus against the patrol car. A search followed. Marcus remained calm, respectful, careful with every word. Then Keller discovered a small folding utility knife inside Marcus's backpack. It was a legal tool used for school projects and camping trips. The officer smiled, not a friendly smile, the kind of smile that appears when someone believes they have finally found what they were looking for. Within minutes, handcuffs closed around Marcus's wrists. As the patrol car carried him away through the dark Atlanta streets, he watched the neighborhood disappear behind him. He still believed everything would be explained soon. He had no idea that a single arrest report was about to destroy his future. The Fulton County Detention Center smelled like disinfectant, concrete, and exhaustion. Marcus Bennett sat alone on a narrow steel bench beneath fluorescent lights that never seemed to dim. Every sound echoed through the hallway. Doors slammed, radios crackled, distant voices rose and faded. He had been there for nearly 6 hours. No one had explained why he remained in custody. No one had allowed him to call his mother. At first, Marcus believed it was a misunderstanding. He assumed an officer would eventually review the facts and release him. That belief slowly disappeared with every passing hour. A booking officer photographed him from multiple angles. Flashbulbs exploded in front of his eyes. His fingerprints were collected one finger at a time. Forms were completed. Signatures were requested. Questions were asked without answers being offered in return. Marcus complied with everything. His parents had spent years teaching him how to behave during police encounters. Stay calm, stay respectful, do not argue, do not raise your voice, survive the moment. Yet none of those lessons seemed to matter. Meanwhile, across Atlanta, Angela Bennett drove through the city searching for information. Rain had begun falling harder, wind rattled the trees lining residential streets. Every phone call led to another phone number. Every question produced another delay. When she finally located her son, nearly midnight had arrived. The officer who answered her questions barely looked up. "The investigation is ongoing," he said. Angela stared at him in disbelief. "Investigation of what?" The officer shrugged. "Armed robbery." The word struck her like a physical blow. Marcus had never been suspended from school, never been arrested, never even received detention. The idea that he had committed armed robbery was absurd. But absurdity did not stop paperwork. The following morning, investigators reviewed security footage from a convenience store robbery that had occurred 30 minutes before Marcus's arrest. The real suspect was clearly visible. He was an adult man in his 30s, heavy build, visible neck tattoo, several inches taller than Marcus. Different facial structure, different clothing, different everything. Detective reports should have ended the case immediately. Instead, Officer Keller submitted a report claiming Marcus generally matched the description. He also described the small utility knife found inside Marcus's backpack as a dangerous weapon connected to the robbery. The language transformed suspicion into accusation. The accusation transformed into charges, and the charges transformed into a criminal case. 3 days later, Marcus appeared before a magistrate judge for a preliminary hearing. Yatel. Angela sat in the front row, wearing the same navy blazer she wore during difficult hospital meetings. She desperately wanted someone to apply logic to the situation. Her attorney requested reasonable bail. The prosecutor objected. The judge reviewed the paperwork for less than 5 minutes. Then came the decision. Bail denied. Angela rose from her seat. "Your Honor, my son is a student. He has never missed school. He isn't a flight risk." The judge did not look at her. "Sit down, ma'am." She sat. But something changed inside her. For the first time, fear began replacing confidence. The legal process continued moving forward with frightening speed. School assignments piled up unattended. Debate competitions came and went without Marcus. College application deadlines approached. Friends texted messages he could not answer. Days became weeks. A court-appointed attorney named Thomas Green eventually visited Marcus. The meeting lasted less than 15 minutes. Green appeared exhausted. Files covered his desk. His phone rang repeatedly during their conversation. He promised to review the evidence. He promised to do his best. Then he hurried away to another case. Marcus watched the door close behind him. A strange feeling settled in his chest. For the first time, he wondered whether anyone was actually fighting for him. That evening, while sitting alone in his detention cell, Marcus looked through a small reinforced window. Outside, storm clouds rolled across the Georgia sky. Lightning flashed in the distance. Somewhere beyond those walls, life continued normally. Families ate dinner, students completed homework, friends laughed together. Marcus felt separated from all of it. And far away in Austin, Texas, his father remained trapped inside a confidential government assignment, completely unaware that his son's life was quietly unraveling. The worst part was that evidence proving Marcus's innocence already existed. Someone simply needed the courage to look at it. By the time November arrived, Atlanta felt colder than usual. Wind swept through downtown streets. Gray skies lingered above glass towers and historic brick buildings. The city moved forward while Marcus Bennett remained trapped inside a system that seemed determined to ignore the truth. Every morning began the same way. Steel doors opened, names were called, breakfast trays appeared. Hours passed slowly. Marcus tried reading whenever possible. He borrowed books from the detention center library. History, law, civil rights biographies, stories about people who survived impossible circumstances. Some days the words helped, other days they felt meaningless. The uncertainty was becoming harder to endure than confinement itself. At school, teachers asked about him constantly. Students signed cards and organized support campaigns. His debate coach, Rebecca Collins, refused to believe the charges. She reviewed news reports repeatedly. Nothing made sense. Marcus had spent years building a reputation based on discipline, honesty, and hard work. The accusations felt disconnected from reality. Yet newspapers rarely cared about context. Headlines preferred allegations. Facts came later, sometimes never. Meanwhile, prosecutor Victoria Lang prepared the state's case. She was ambitious and respected throughout Georgia's legal community. Her conviction rate attracted attention from senior officials. Promotions often followed successful prosecutions. When Marcus's file landed on her desk, she immediately noticed weaknesses. No stolen property, no eyewitness identification, no direct connection to the robbery. Surveillance footage remained largely unexplored. The arrest depended almost entirely on Officer Richard Keller's report. A cautious prosecutor might have requested additional review. Victoria chose a different path. She approved the case. Inside police headquarters, Officer Keller continued preparing testimony. One afternoon, he sat alone reviewing surveillance footage. The recording clearly showed the actual robber. The man was older, larger, unmistakably different from Marcus. Keller watched the footage twice, then 3 times. His jaw tightened. For several moments, he simply stared at the screen. He knew exactly what it proved. Then he closed the file. Some decisions change lives forever. This was one of them. Back at the detention facility, Marcus received a long-awaited visit from his mother. Angela entered the visitation room carrying a folder thick with legal paperwork. Dark circles sat beneath her eyes. Her smile appeared forced, but the moment she saw her son, emotion overwhelmed her. Marcus noticed she had lost weight. She noticed he had lost more. Neither wanted to mention it. They spoke through a reinforced glass partition. "We're going to fix this," Angela said. Marcus nodded. He wanted to believe her. "How's Dad?" The question created a brief silence. Angela hesitated. "Still in Texas. Communication restrictions. I'm trying every day." Marcus lowered his eyes. His father always called, always showed up, always found a way. The absence felt wrong. For the first time in his life, Marcus felt truly alone. Several days later, his case was officially assigned to Judge Edward Whitmore. The announcement barely attracted attention. Most people viewed it as routine. Veteran judges received difficult cases all the time. Few people outside legal circles knew Whitmore's reputation. He had spent nearly 3 decades on the bench. Politicians praised him publicly. Lawyers spoke about him differently behind closed doors. His courtroom was known for severe sentencing, especially toward young minority defendants. Complaints surfaced periodically. Investigations never advanced. Power protected power. The pattern continued. Until now, one rainy evening, Marcus sat in the detention center common area, watching television. News coverage flashed across the screen. A government conference in Austin. Federal officials gathered around a podium. Several names appeared in the broadcast graphics. One of them made Marcus sit upright. His father's name, William Bennett. For a moment, Marcus simply stared. Most people watching would not recognize the significance. Marcus did. His father was not merely attending the conference. He was standing beside senior government leaders, addressing reporters, speaking on matters involving statewide justice policy. Questions suddenly filled Marcus's mind. Why had his father never discussed the true extent of his work? What exactly did he do, and why was he surrounded by some of the most powerful people in state government? Before Marcus could process the answers, the broadcast ended. The television switched to another story. But the image remained in his thoughts. Far away in Texas, William Bennett had finally received a stack of delayed messages. The first voicemail came from his wife. The second sounded more urgent. The third contained tears. By the 10th message, his face had gone completely pale. For the first time in weeks, he learned what had happened to his son. And when William Bennett boarded a flight back to Georgia that night, several people in powerful positions suddenly had a problem they did not yet realize existed. The private jet landed just after sunrise at Atlanta's airport. A cold wind swept across the runway as William Bennett stepped onto the tarmac, carrying only a briefcase and a growing sense of dread. He had not slept, not during the flight, not after listening to Angela's messages, not after hearing his son's name connected to armed robbery. Every voicemail replayed in his mind. Every unanswered call felt like a personal failure. For years, William had dedicated himself to public service. Long hours, endless meetings, difficult decisions. He believed his work improved lives. Now his own family had suffered while he was absent. That realization cut deeper than anything else. A black SUV waited outside the airport. As it sped toward downtown Atlanta, William reviewed documents that had been assembled overnight. Police reports, arrest records, court filings, witness statements. The deeper he read, the angrier he became. Not because the evidence was overwhelming, because it was almost non-existent. The entire case rested on assumptions, general descriptions, weak conclusions, and one officer's version of events. William closed the file and stared through the window. The Atlanta skyline emerged through low clouds. Steel towers rose above the city like silent observers. Somewhere among them sat the courthouse where his son's future was being dismantled. At the detention center, Marcus had no idea his father was back. He woke before dawn as usual. Breakfast arrived. Guards completed routine checks. Nothing appeared different. Yet by mid-morning, administrators suddenly became nervous. Phone calls increased, doors opened and closed more frequently. Staff members whispered in hallways. Something was happening. Nobody explained what. Across town, Angela sat inside a conference room with attorney Thomas Green. The meeting was not encouraging. Green looked exhausted. Stacks of files surrounded him. "The trial starts next week," he said quietly. Angela stared at him. "You sound like we've already lost." Green hesitated. The silence answered her question. She felt her stomach tighten. The prosecutor had momentum. The judge had a reputation. The evidence favorable to Marcus remained buried beneath procedural failures. Every path seemed blocked. Then the conference room door opened. William Bennett walked inside. Angela rose immediately. Relief and frustration collided at once. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then she wrapped her arms around him. The embrace lasted longer than either expected. When they finally separated, William looked toward the attorney. "Tell me everything." Over the next 2 hours, he listened carefully. No interruptions, no assumptions, only questions. Precise questions, the kind asked by someone who understood legal systems intimately. Green gradually realized something unusual. William was not merely concerned. He possessed knowledge most clients never had. Procedural knowledge, judicial knowledge, institutional knowledge. By the end of the meeting, the attorney appeared stunned. William requested every available document, every report, every recording, every filing. Then he made several phone calls. The first lasted 3 minutes. The second lasted less than 1. The third changed everything. Meanwhile, Prosecutor Victoria Lang prepared witness testimony. She expected a straightforward trial. The case was weak but manageable. Judge Whitmore rarely challenged prosecutors. Officer Keller projected confidence. The defense appeared overwhelmed. From her perspective, the outcome seemed predictable. She had no idea powerful eyes were now examining every page of the file. Late that afternoon, a retired investigator named Samuel Brooks received a request. "Review the surveillance footage, review the arrest, review everything." Brooks had spent 30 years conducting criminal investigations. Within 45 minutes, he found problems. Within 2 hours, he found more. By evening, he called William directly. "Your son isn't the robber." William remained silent. "I know," he finally replied. "No," Brooks said, "you don't understand. This isn't a mistake. Somebody ignored evidence." The words hung heavily between them. Outside William's hotel window, rain began falling again. Traffic lights reflected across wet streets. The city glowed beneath the storm. For the first time, William considered a possibility more frightening than negligence. What if Marcus had not been accidentally accused? What if people had knowingly allowed it to happen? That night, while reviewing body camera footage frame by frame, Brooks discovered something hidden inside the recording. Officer Keller could be heard discussing the surveillance image before filing his report. The audio lasted only seconds, but it was enough. Enough to prove he already knew the suspect looked nothing like Marcus. Enough to expose a lie. Enough to destroy careers. And enough to ignite a chain of events that would soon reach the highest levels of Georgia's justice system. The trial began on a cold Monday morning in downtown Atlanta. Rain clouds drifted above the city, turning the courthouse windows into sheets of grey glass. Reporters gathered near the entrance, though few expected the case to attract much attention. To them, Marcus Bennett was simply another defendant, another name on a docket, another teenager accused of committing a serious crime. Inside Courtroom 7, Judge Edward Whitmore adjusted his glasses and reviewed paperwork while attorneys organized their files. Marcus sat quietly beside Thomas Green. His detention uniform hung loosely from his shoulders. Weeks of stress had changed him. The confident student who once led debate competitions seemed distant now. His eyes carried a weight no 17-year-old should know. Angela sat behind the defense table. William occupied the seat beside her. Neither looked away from their son. The prosecution presented its case first. Victoria Lang spoke confidently. She described a dangerous robbery. She emphasized public safety. She repeatedly referenced the utility knife found in Marcus's backpack. Her presentation sounded persuasive. Until someone examined the details. Officer Richard Keller testified next. He appeared calm, professional, certain. According to his testimony, Marcus matched the suspect description. According to his report, the knife supported probable cause. According to his statements, every action followed proper procedure. Judge Whitmore nodded throughout much of the testimony. Victoria Lang seemed pleased. Marcus felt hopeless. Then Thomas Green stood. For weeks he had appeared overwhelmed, distracted, unprepared, but something had changed. William's investigation had transformed the defense strategy. Green approached the witness stand carrying several documents. His first question seemed ordinary. Simple timeline verification, routine procedure, nothing dramatic. Then he introduced surveillance photographs, large images displayed on courtroom monitors. The actual robber appeared clearly. Heavy build, neck tattoo, older face, different height, different body structure, different everything. A murmur spread through the courtroom. Officer Keller shifted uncomfortably. Green continued. You reviewed this footage before filing your report, correct? Keller hesitated. Yes. And you observed the suspect shown here? Yes. Would you agree this individual does not resemble Marcus Bennett? The courtroom became silent. Keller looked toward the prosecutor, then toward the judge, finally back toward the photograph. Generally speaking, descriptions can vary. The answer sounded weak. Everyone knew it. Green pressed harder. Then came the body camera recording. The same recording Samuel Brooks had reviewed, the same recording containing a conversation Officer Keller never expected anyone to hear. The audio echoed through the courtroom speakers. A voice identified differences between Marcus and the suspect before the arrest report was completed. The recording lasted less than 30 seconds. Its impact was devastating. Keller's face lost color. Victoria Lang looked stunned. Even Judge Whitmore appeared unsettled. During lunch recess, reporters flooded courthouse hallways. News alerts spread across Atlanta. Television stations interrupted programming. Social media exploded. The story suddenly became impossible to ignore. By afternoon, courtroom seats were filled. Community leaders arrived. Civil rights advocates appeared. Legal analysts began discussing the case publicly. What had seemed routine now looked suspicious, very suspicious. That evening, William met privately with Samuel Brooks. Additional evidence covered the conference table. Personnel records, complaint histories, prior disciplinary reviews. The picture growing before them was disturbing. Officer Keller had accumulated numerous citizen complaints over several years. Most involved questionable stops. Several involved allegations of profiling. None resulted in meaningful discipline. Brooks slid another folder across the table. There's more, he said. William opened it slowly. Inside were sentencing statistics connected to Judge Whitmore. Page after page, case after case, patterns hidden within decades of decisions. William studied the numbers. The room felt colder. The evidence suggested something larger than a wrongful arrest, something systemic, something powerful, and if the data proved accurate, Marcus's case was only one example among many. Outside, thunder rolled across the Atlanta skyline. Rain hammered against hotel windows. William stared at the documents for several minutes. Then he reached for his phone. because the information sitting on that table had become too serious to handle privately, and by sunrise, officials across Georgia would begin receiving calls they never expected to receive. By Tuesday morning, the story had spread far beyond Atlanta. Television networks discussed the case during morning broadcasts. Legal commentators analyzed courtroom footage. Civil rights organizations issued statements demanding answers. What began as a local criminal prosecution was becoming a statewide controversy. Inside the Georgia Capitol building, officials received copies of documents assembled by William Bennett and Samuel Brooks. The evidence raised disturbing questions, not only about Marcus's arrest, about the entire system surrounding it. Meanwhile, Marcus returned to court for the fourth day of trial. The atmosphere felt completely different. Reporters filled every available seat. Additional security officers lined the hallways. Television cameras waited outside the courthouse entrance. For the first time since his arrest, Marcus sensed something shifting. People were finally paying attention. Judge Edward Whitmore entered the courtroom looking noticeably strained. His usual confidence seemed diminished. His movements were slower. His voice carried less authority than before. He knew scrutiny had arrived, and scrutiny was something he had avoided for most of his career. The defense called Samuel Brooks to testify. The retired investigator walked calmly to the witness stand. His credentials spoke for themselves. 3 decades in criminal investigations, hundreds of major cases, a reputation for accuracy. Brooks spent nearly 2 hours explaining the evidence, frame by frame, document by document, timeline by timeline. He demonstrated how the surveillance footage excluded Marcus. He explained inconsistencies within Officer Keller's reports. He identified procedural violations during the stop and search. Most importantly, he established that exculpatory evidence existed from the beginning, evidence that should have prevented charges entirely. The courtroom listened in complete silence. Even Victoria Lang appeared increasingly uncomfortable. During cross-examination, she attempted to challenge Brooks's conclusions. The effort failed. The facts remained unchanged. Outside court, public reaction intensified. Students organized rallies across Atlanta. Teachers signed petitions. Community leaders demanded independent review. Thousands of social media posts shared Marcus's story. People who had never met him suddenly recognized his face. Yet Marcus felt little excitement. Weeks inside detention had changed him. Hope felt dangerous. Hope could disappear. Hope could be taken away. That evening, after court adjourned, William received an unexpected visitor. The meeting took place inside a quiet conference room. Rain tapped against the windows. Streetlights reflected across wet pavement below. A woman entered carrying several thick folders. Her name was Evelyn Carter, former federal prosecutor, independent legal consultant, known throughout the country for investigating judicial misconduct. She placed the folders on the table. "I reviewed Whitmore's sentencing history," she said. William remained silent. Evelyn opened the first file, then the second, then the third. The pattern became impossible to ignore. Cases spanning nearly 3 decades, similar defendants, similar charges, wildly different outcomes. The numbers told a troubling story. Again and again, minority defendants received significantly harsher sentences than similarly situated white defendants. The disparity appeared consistently. Year after year, case after case. William leaned back slowly. "How long has this been happening?" Evelyn sighed, long enough that people stopped asking questions. The answer lingered heavily in the room, because sometimes injustice survives not through secrecy, but through acceptance. The following day brought another surprise. Prosecutor Victoria Lang requested a private meeting with senior officials. She had spent nights reviewing evidence herself. The more she examined the file, the more concerned she became. By afternoon, rumors began circulating through courthouse corridors. Something significant was happening behind closed doors. Nobody knew exactly what. Late that evening, Marcus sat alone in his detention cell. The facility felt unusually quiet. Wind rattled distant windows. Clouds covered the moon. He opened a notebook and began writing. Not legal notes, not arguments, thoughts, fears, questions. He wrote about missing ordinary life. He wrote about his mother. He wrote about college, He wrote about feeling invisible. Then he stopped. A guard appeared outside the cell. "Bennett," the man said. Marcus looked up. "You have a visitor tomorrow morning." "My mother?" The guard shook his head. "No." A brief pause followed. Then the guard smiled slightly. "Someone much more important to this case." Marcus stared at him, confused, curious, uneasy. The guard walked away without another word, and somewhere across Atlanta, a decision was being finalized that would soon bring the entire prosecution dangerously close to collapse. Thursday morning arrived beneath a pale winter sky. Atlanta's streets glistened from overnight rain. Traffic moved slowly through downtown, while reporters gathered outside the courthouse long before sunrise. Inside the detention center, Marcus Bennett sat at a small metal table waiting for his unexpected visitor. His stomach felt tight. Questions filled his mind. The guard's comment from the previous evening had not left him. Someone important, someone connected to the case. The visitation room door opened. Marcus immediately stood. His father entered. For several seconds, neither moved. The weeks apart suddenly felt much longer. William Bennett crossed the room and sat opposite his son. His expression remained composed, but Marcus could see exhaustion in his eyes. The kind of exhaustion that comes from carrying both anger and guilt. "I'm sorry," William said quietly. Marcus blinked. "For what?" "For not being here sooner." The room fell silent. Marcus looked down at his hands. He had imagined this conversation many times. Anger, frustration, questions. Instead, he felt relief. His father was finally here. That mattered more than anything else. "You came," Marcus replied. William nodded. "And I'm not leaving until this is over." For the first time in weeks, Marcus smiled, only slightly, but it was real. Meanwhile, inside the prosecutor's office, Victoria Lang faced the most difficult decision of her career. The evidence no longer supported the case. The surveillance footage contradicted the arrest. The body camera recording undermined Officer Keller. The defense investigation exposed major procedural failures. Continuing the prosecution carried enormous risks. Yet withdrawing the charges would create consequences of its own. Political consequences, professional consequences, personal consequences. For nearly an hour, she sat alone, reviewing documents. Eventually, she reached a conclusion, and it was not the one many people expected. Back at the courthouse, Judge Whitmore opened proceedings shortly before noon. The courtroom was packed, every seat occupied. Additional spectators stood along the walls. Reporters filled the back rows. The atmosphere felt electric. Everyone sensed a turning point approaching. Then Victoria Lang stood. The movement immediately drew attention. She adjusted her glasses, cleared her throat, and addressed the court. "Your Honor, after reviewing newly presented evidence, the prosecution requests an immediate recess to re-evaluate several material aspects of this case." A murmur swept through the room. Marcus looked toward his attorney. Thomas Green appeared shocked. Judge Whitmore frowned. "On what basis?" Victoria met his gaze. "On the basis of evidence that may substantially impact the integrity of these proceedings." The statement landed like a thunderclap. For several moments, nobody spoke. Then, Whitmore reluctantly granted the request. Court recessed. Outside, reporters erupted into activity. Breaking news alerts spread nationwide. Television analysts immediately began speculating. Had the prosecution lost confidence? Were charges about to be dropped? Was something even larger unfolding? The answer emerged later that afternoon. A special review panel convened at the request of senior state officials. Independent investigators examined evidence connected to Marcus's arrest. Their findings were devastating. The review concluded that probable cause had been insufficient. Critical evidence had been ignored. Investigative standards had not been followed, and serious questions remained regarding the conduct of multiple public officials. News of the findings spread rapidly. Public outrage intensified. Community leaders demanded accountability. Civil rights organizations called for broader investigations. State legislators began requesting hearings. The story had grown beyond Marcus. Now it threatened to expose systemic failures throughout Georgia's justice system. That evening, William attended a confidential meeting with senior legal authorities. The discussion lasted nearly 3 hours. When he finally emerged, reporters immediately surrounded him. Microphones extended, cameras flashed, questions flew from every direction. William stopped briefly. He rarely spoke publicly about personal matters. Tonight was different. "The evidence deserves complete transparency," he said. "Justice requires accountability from everyone, including those entrusted to uphold it. Nothing more, nothing less." Then he walked away. The statement dominated news coverage for the remainder of the night. Inside his detention cell, Marcus watched portions of the broadcast on a small television mounted high on the wall. For the first time since his arrest, he sensed the possibility of freedom. But he also understood something else. Even if the charges disappeared tomorrow, the experience would remain. The fear, the humiliation, the lost weeks. Some wounds did not vanish with a court order. Near midnight, while most of Atlanta slept, an emergency filing arrived at the courthouse. The document contained fewer than 20 pages, yet its contents had the power to end the entire case before the next morning. And when Judge Whitmore read the filing, witnesses later claimed his hands began to shake. Judge Edward Whitmore arrived at the courthouse before dawn. The city remained quiet beneath a blanket of fog. Streetlights reflected off wet pavement. The towering buildings of downtown Atlanta looked distant and cold. He carried the emergency filing in his briefcase. He had read it 3 times during the night. Each reading made the situation worse. The document summarized findings from independent investigators, body camera evidence, surveillance footage, witness interviews, internal communications. Every page pointed toward the same conclusion. Marcus Bennett should never have been arrested, should never have been charged, should never have entered Whitmore's courtroom. For the first time in years, the judge felt something unfamiliar. Fear. Not fear of public criticism, fear of exposure. Meanwhile, reporters packed the courthouse steps. National media outlets had arrived overnight. Satellite trucks lined nearby streets. Television crews prepared for live broadcasts. The story now dominated headlines across America. Parents discussed it at breakfast tables. Students debated it in classrooms. Attorneys argued about it in law offices. Everyone wanted answers. Inside the courtroom, every seat filled before proceedings began. Additional spectators stood shoulder to shoulder along the walls. The atmosphere felt less like a trial and more like history unfolding. Marcus entered through a side door. The room immediately quieted. Weeks earlier, nobody had known his name. Now hundreds of eyes followed his every movement. Yet Marcus felt none of the attention. He simply wanted his life back. Judge Whitmore entered. His usual confidence had vanished. The difference was impossible to miss. After opening formalities, Prosecutor Victoria Lang stood. Her voice sounded steady. Her expression did not. "The state of Georgia moves to dismiss all charges against Marcus Bennett immediately." The courtroom froze. No movement, no whispers, only silence. Then came a wave of reactions. Gasps, murmurs, disbelief. Angela Bennett covered her mouth with trembling hands. Tears instantly filled her eyes. Thomas Green closed his eyes briefly. Even he seemed overwhelmed. Marcus sat motionless. The words felt unreal. "Dismiss all charges." He repeated them silently, again and again. Judge Whitmore looked toward the prosecutor. "On what grounds?" Victoria did not hesitate. "Newly verified evidence establishes that the defendant was not responsible for the offense. Continuing prosecution would represent a miscarriage of justice." The statement echoed throughout the courtroom. A miscarriage of justice. The phrase carried enormous weight, especially coming from the prosecution itself. Judge Whitmore stared at the paperwork before him. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Then he signed the order. One signature, a few strokes of ink. The legal nightmare officially ended. "All charges are dismissed," Whitmore announced. Marcus lowered his head. His shoulders began shaking. Weeks of fear, weeks of humiliation, weeks of uncertainty. Everything finally broke loose. Angela rushed forward. This time nobody stopped her. She wrapped her arms around her son. Marcus held her tightly. Neither cared who was watching. Across the room, William Bennett stood quietly. Relief washed across his face. Yet beneath that relief remained anger. Because dismissal solved only part of the problem. The damage had already been done. Outside, news spread within minutes. Television networks interrupted programming. Social media exploded. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse, cheering as Marcus emerged through the front entrance. The winter sun finally broke through the clouds. Warm light touched the courthouse steps. Marcus stopped walking, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath. Fresh air. Freedom. Simple things suddenly felt extraordinary. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed continuously. Marcus ignored them. He wanted only one thing: home. Yet while the public celebrated, investigators continued working. Officer Richard Keller had already been placed on administrative leave. Additional reviews were underway. Judicial oversight officials were examining Whitmore's record. State authorities were investigating prosecutorial decisions. The case was no longer about a single wrongful arrest. It had become something much larger. Late that evening, William received another call. This one came from an investigator involved in the broader review. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. When it ended, William remained silent for a long time. The findings were worse than anyone imagined. Marcus was not the first person affected, not even close. Dozens of past convictions connected to Judge Whitmore were now under examination, and evidence suggested multiple innocent people might still be sitting behind bars. Marcus had won his freedom. But the real battle was only beginning. Spring arrived across Georgia with surprising warmth. Dogwood trees bloomed along city streets. Parks filled with families. Restaurants opened patios. Life seemed determined to move forward. For Marcus Bennett, however, moving forward proved more complicated. Freedom had returned. Peace had not. Some mornings he woke before sunrise, convinced he was still inside the detention center. The memory felt vivid. Steel doors, fluorescent lights, footsteps echoing through concrete hallways. Then reality slowly returned. His bedroom, his family home, the life he almost lost. Angela noticed the changes immediately. Marcus sat with his back against walls in restaurants. He flinched whenever police sirens sounded nearby. Crowded places made him uncomfortable. He smiled less often, spoke less frequently. The experience had ended legally. Emotionally, it remained unfinished. Meanwhile, the investigations continued gathering momentum. The review of Judge Edward Whitmore's record expanded dramatically. What began as a limited inquiry became a comprehensive examination of nearly 3 decades of judicial decisions. Teams of analysts reviewed thousands of case files. Patterns emerged, then stronger patterns, then evidence impossible to dismiss. Sentencing disparities appeared repeatedly. Cases with missing documentation surfaced. Questions multiplied faster than officials could answer them. Public pressure intensified. News organizations published investigative reports weekly. Editorial boards demanded accountability. Citizens attended town hall meetings in record numbers. The conversation had expanded beyond Marcus. Now people questioned whether justice had been administered fairly for years. Officer Richard Keller faced separate investigations. Internal reviews uncovered a troubling history. Multiple citizen complaints, questionable stops, repeated allegations of profiling. Most had been dismissed without serious examination. That reality angered the public even more. People began asking a simple question: how many warning signs had been ignored? Across Atlanta, civic organizations organized forums discussing legal reform. University professors hosted public discussions. Former judges spoke openly. Defense attorneys shared stories. The case became a catalyst for conversations long avoided. One evening, Marcus attended a community event at his former high school. Hundreds of students filled the auditorium. Many expected him to deliver an emotional speech. Instead, he spoke quietly, honestly. He described fear, isolation, uncertainty. He described what it felt like when nobody seemed willing to listen. The room remained silent throughout his remarks, not because people were bored, because they were listening carefully. For the first time, Marcus realized his experience carried power. Not political power, human power. The ability to help others feel seen. The ability to prevent silence from winning. Later that month, state officials announced major reforms, new requirements for evidence review, expanded oversight procedures, additional protections for juvenile defendants. independent audits of sentencing practices. The changes did not erase what happened, but they represented progress, and progress mattered. One Saturday afternoon, Marcus and William sat together on the family porch. The neighborhood looked exactly as it had before the arrest. Children rode bicycles, birds moved between oak trees, neighbors waved while walking dogs. Normal life surrounded them. For a long time, neither spoke. Then William broke the silence. "I keep wondering what would have happened if nobody looked deeper." Marcus stared toward the street. "I wonder that too." The answer frightened both of them, because they knew the truth. Without attention, without investigation, without persistence, the system might have continued moving forward unchecked. That realization carried its own burden. Several weeks later, a special commission released preliminary findings. The report exceeded 200 pages. Its conclusions shocked the state. Multiple wrongful convictions were recommended for review. Several imprisoned individuals became eligible for immediate hearings. Families who had lost hope suddenly found reasons to believe again. The ripple effect continued growing. Marcus watched the news coverage from home. Each story reminded him how close he had come to disappearing inside a broken process. Yet one final chapter remained unwritten, because after months of investigations, hearings, reviews, and public scrutiny, state authorities were finally preparing to announce the most consequential decisions of all. Decisions that would determine whether accountability truly existed or whether powerful people would once again escape responsibility. 6 months after Marcus Bennett walked out of the Fulton County Courthouse, the final report was released. The announcement came on a bright morning in Atlanta. Television networks carried the press conference live. Reporters crowded the state capitol. Legal experts filled studio panels across the country. People wanted answers. This time, they received them. The Special Commission's findings stretched across hundreds of pages. The conclusions were direct. Systemic failures had occurred, evidence had been ignored, oversight had been inadequate. Procedures designed to protect citizens had not functioned as intended. The report stopped short of dramatic language. It did not need any. The facts spoke for themselves. Judge Edward Whitmore officially resigned before disciplinary proceedings concluded. His judicial record remained under review. Multiple past convictions were reopened. Independent courts began re-examining cases that had once seemed permanently closed. Officer Richard Keller was terminated from law enforcement service. Additional investigations into his conduct continued. Departments across Georgia reviewed prior arrests connected to his reports. Several convictions were immediately flagged for reconsideration. Prosecutor Victoria Lang publicly acknowledged mistakes in the handling of Marcus's case. Her office implemented sweeping policy changes regarding evidence review and disclosure requirements. Across the state, legal reform accelerated, new protections were adopted, independent oversight expanded. Body camera review procedures became mandatory. Juvenile defendants received stronger safeguards, public defenders gained additional resources. The changes could not erase the past, but they offered hope for the future. For Marcus, life slowly began finding a new rhythm. Healing arrived in small moments. A family dinner without legal discussions, a quiet walk through the neighborhood, an afternoon spent laughing with friends, a night of uninterrupted sleep. Recovery was not dramatic. It was gradual, human, real. By autumn, Marcus returned to competitive debate. His first tournament after the ordeal took place in Chicago. Hundreds of students attended from across the country. Standing behind the podium again felt strange, familiar, uncomfortable, empowering. All at once, his topic focused on accountability within public institutions. He spoke without notes, without anger, without bitterness. Only truth. The audience listened carefully. When he finished, the room stood and applauded. The recognition mattered, but not because he won, because he had found his voice again. Months later, college acceptance letters arrived. New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, several prestigious universities offered admission. Marcus eventually chose a law program connected to a major university in Chicago. The decision surprised nobody. He wanted to help people. He wanted to understand systems. Most importantly, he wanted to ensure that others received the representation he almost never had. One evening before leaving for college, Marcus sat on the family porch with Angela and William. The sunset painted the Georgia sky with shades of orange and gold. A gentle breeze moved through the trees. The neighborhood felt peaceful, normal. For a while nobody spoke. Then Angela smiled. "You know," she said softly, "they tried to define your future with one mistake." Marcus looked toward the horizon. "I know." William placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "And they failed." Marcus nodded. The words carried weight. Because the story was never really about power. It was never about politics. It was never about headlines. It was about resilience. About ordinary people refusing to surrender when institutions fail. About families who keep fighting when hope becomes difficult. About the belief that justice must belong to everyone, not only the fortunate. Years later, many people would remember the investigations, the reforms, the headlines. Marcus remembered something simpler. The moment he stepped outside the courthouse, the warmth of sunlight on his face, the first deep breath of freedom, the realization that his story was not ending. It was beginning. The lessons spread far beyond Georgia. Students studied the case. Law schools discussed it. Communities referenced it during conversations about fairness and accountability. Its impact reached people who would never meet Marcus Bennett. And perhaps that became the most meaningful outcome of all. One young man lost weeks of his life, but his courage helped protect countless others. Justice, he learned, is not a destination. It is a responsibility. A responsibility carried by judges, officers, lawyers, leaders, parents, neighbors, and citizens. A responsibility that must be renewed every day. Because when good people stop paying attention, injustice finds room to grow. And when good people refuse to look away, change becomes possible. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, and share this video.